Hey, everybody out there. Here we are. Now we're actually live, it says up there. Yeah, all you folks out there on the internet, whether you're watching on the Food Not Bombs global Facebook page or another Facebook page such as Kebu or Popular Resistance, or on Twitter or YouTube, you can feel free to share the link if you like. But we are here. I'm here with a special edition of discussions, talking with Keith McHenry on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the first meal served by Food Not Bombs. And you can find all these discussions, this discussion and others, archived in various places, including, in this case, at the Food Not Bombs Facebook page in the videos section, as well as on my YouTube page, David Rovix, youtube.com/drovix. You'll find it there in the discussions with David playlist and in podcast form on lots of different platforms. If you look for This Week with David Rovix, wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, there's the little technical commercial, whatever that was. And Keith, great to have you. Great to have you here.
I'm glad you're doing that, not me. Well, thank you so much, David.
Somebody has to remember where these things go,
or how it even works.
Like yeah, how it works.
So I wanted to remember this day because a couple of things. So back in 1980, when Food Not Bombs started, we were a street performance group, really. And the very first street performance was that we dressed up as soldiers with had a poster that said, "Wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed?" And the Air Force had to hold the bake sale to buy a bomber. And our actual goal was to raise money to pay back bail from somebody had freed one of the co-founders, Brian Feigenbaum, from jail after the May 24th occupation attempt of Seabrook, May 24th, 1980. So some people get up until
and Seabrook, just for context for people who aren't from the Northeast, we're talking about a nuclear reactor in New Hampshire, and we're talking about the Clamshell Alliance and the anti-nuclear movement of the late 70s, early 80s that was going on around there, and serving the food was actually sort of just an accidental kind of thing that you got into to raise money for bail. I never knew. That's fantastic. Yeah, and this was in Boston. We're talking about Boston, Massachusetts.
Correct, right? In Harvard Square and the Park Street Station in Boston, and so from that we were just coming up with all these street performance ideas, and we decided, because there was the people of Seabrook, New Hampshire, were either for or against the nuclear power station, that we did not need to organize in Seabrook anymore, and the radioactive ship containment was there, so that made that trying to scale the fences and occupy the construction site had become quite dangerous and inadvisable. So our idea was to organize around the Bank of Boston and this guy named Richard Hill, who was the president, who ultimately becomes the president of the World Bank after he leaves the Bank of Boston. And so we did we had a thing called the First National Bank Project that Food Not Bombs was participating in, was mostly us that was actually organizing it. And our idea was to bring this message of the connection between nuclear arms race and the nuclear industry to the streets of Boston. So at one point, I was one of the only people that had like a actual suit. So I would play Richard Hill, and we'd go in front of the bank downtown Boston and do skits. Well, then it occurred to us that we could protest at the stockholders meeting of the Bank of Boston outside of the Federal Reserve Bank. And we were influenced, just for a little bit of context, by a group called the Living Theater, which at that time was based in New York City. And they were an experimental theater company, still are, and they were involved in kind of these theatrical events where the public themselves would become part of the event. That was their philosophy. And we really appreciated that. And we actually were providing some meals when they do theater games in the Boston area. And so we'd become one of our co-founders, Joe Swanson, was connected with them. And this was somewhat of our inspiration, that as well as the Bread and Puppet Theater up in the Northeast Kingdom in in
Vermont.
northern Vermont. And so that was, and I was an art student, and I was also a produce worker at a natural food store. And so I was very interested in this being sort of like performance art, it's kind of theater performance art where we're involving the public. And that's how we came to this idea that we would dress as hobos and we would set up a soup line outside the stockholders meeting of the Bank of Boston on March 26, 1981. And for people that were not alive at that time, Reagan had just been inaugurated, and he had been promising to increase military spending and to reduce social services. And at that time, there was also a lot of dilapidated public housing units throughout the whole country, but their leases were starting to come to an end. And it was a possibility that that people would lose their housing as a result. We weren't exactly clued into that, but we did have the impression that what Reagan was saying and what Richard Hill at the Bank of Boston was saying, and the board of directors of Raytheon and Lockheed and General Electric and so on, was that there would be this massive funding of the Cold War. Soviet Union existed at that moment, and that social services and particularly public housing would eventually be slowly eliminated, and therefore it would be a future where Americans would probably have to stand in line to get food at a soup kitchen.
You were predicting that basically before it happened. At the beginning, I mean, Reagan was sort of alluding to some of these things, I suppose, but that was very much what happened with the whole Reagan presidency, and then continued on with policies afterwards, as you've pointed out before, with both parties. And you guys were pretty much predicting this was going to be what the 1980s would represent, huh?
Exactly. So yeah, our idea was we would have, just dress up like the people we'd seen in movies and photographs of the 1930s. But we also were busy collecting food from grocery stores and so on, and taking it to public housing projects. And that's hence where the name Food Not Bombs comes from, because one of the housing developments that I would take food to was on Portland Avenue in Cambridge. And project of scientists from MIT were about to embark on designing a guidance system for the MX missile. And they had built a lab across the street from these housing projects called Draper Lab. And so the idea that my friends who I was bringing the produce to were complaining about the failing electricity and plumbing and so on, which is typical of public housing at that time, and that there's a brand new, building across the street, inspired a conversation between me and them, and that's how I learned that it was where they're designing nuclear missile guidance systems, and that's hence where the name Food Not Bombs came from.
And the phenomenon of Food Not Bombs became one of basically this fabulous combination of mutual aid, protest, all together, wrapped up together, but serving food in a public place, at the same time protesting implicitly or explicitly protesting the military industrial complex while feeding hungry people in a public place. And this whole combination both really took off around the world, and also was extremely threatening to the authorities here in the United States. And as a result of engaging in these activities, you and many other people have been arrested. I don't know how many. You've personally been arrested, I think, hundreds of times. You've been tortured by the San Francisco police. I think it's important to publicly note, and I'm sorry, but it's true, and it needs to be said. And it's, I think it's just putting this, for anybody that might not know, it's just a fascinating thing that this food line that started as a bit of an accidental street theater event in Boston, it did become, and I'm sure I'm pretty sure you didn't expect that it would become a global sort of meme. But it did. Huh? It's amazing. I was just talking with a Food Not Bombs activist in Manila the other day on Facebook. I mean, folks are everywhere.
Yeah, it's incredible. The thing that I find is interesting about that soup line is we did not have, we did not do a lot of outreach, and therefore we didn't think we'd actually have a line. And our idea was to shock the people coming out of South Station, which is there, and the people going in to the stockholders meeting or coming out of the stockholders meeting for lunch would see this line. So at about midnight on the of the 26th, early in the morning on the 26th, I went to the only shelter for unhoused people in Boston at the time, called the Pine Street Inn. And basically it was about 30, 40 guys sitting around on tile benches and on the floor. And I gave a little speech about how we were going to have this protest the next day, and we invited them to come. And they were like, oh, wow, this is great, like a protest like the 60s. And it was shocking that they did show up, and there was a line. And I remember there was this one businessman who was just completely freaking out. He said, oh my God, Reagan's only been in office like a little over a month, and there's already soup lines here in the streets. And some of the stockholders flipped us off, and some were actually really supportive. And but one thing that was remarkable was that the people that came to eat told us that there was no programs for people that lived outside in Boston to get a meal. And so that night, when we're washing up the pots and pans and everything, we decided we'd quit our jobs and do nothing but collect food and deliver it to projects and to Rosie's Place, the battered women's shelter, and so on. And that we would then do the street theater every afternoon so that people could get meals. And we mostly did it in Brattle Square, which is a little, no longer really exists, but was a place in Cambridge next to Harvard Square, where we had already been doing little street theater things already.
What was Brattle Square? This might be only interesting to anybody in the Boston area, but what was Brattle Square like before they paved it over and gentrified Harvard Square completely?
Well, it was a little triangle with like a map of Harvard Square, and it had like a beautiful little pine tree, which we would hang our T-shirts and things off of. And then we had two dear friends, Bobby and Sue, would come with 2 drum sets, and they would play music and attract a crowd. And then we did one of the street theaters was happened when the Pepsi challenge set up next to us. And they were doing this program thing called the Pepsi Challenge, and it was advertised in the student papers and on TV and radio and so on. And so you would come up, and they would blindfold you, and the students who were hired to run this operation would open all the Coke bottles the night before, so they'd go flat, and then you would have to tell which was Pepsi, which was Coke. Well, oddly enough, the poster that we've had found, wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed, and the Air Force had to hold the bake sale to build a bomber.
I grew up with that poster in my kitchen, by the way.
Yeah,
my mom had it. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very, really amazing. And so we gained that when we were moving a family. I had a little movie company called Smooth Move. But one of the other things that we moved was the New England Free Press, and they gave us all the overstock that they had, all the overprints. And one of those was a brochure about how Coca-Cola was hiring hiring death squads to kill labor organizers in Guatemala because of they were trying to organize, the labor unions were organizing the sugarcane harvesters, and they wanted to put a stop to increase expenses in manufacturing Coca-Cola. So we had that brochure, and then we also had lots of fruit, and we had this huge tofu pickup that we got every day at Bread and Circus in Central Square, of chunks of tofu that fell off of their like little corners of their 8-ounce cubes that they're trying to manufacture. And so we did this thing called the Tofu Smoothie Challenge. And so I would stand there and say, hey, there's more nutrition in this one cup of tofu smoothie than all the Pepsi products on earth. And this is before Pepsi bought like Pizza Hut and stuff like that. They were just sugar water at that point. And there would be a huge line passing us, and then we'd hand them the brochure about death squads in Guatemala killing labor organizers. And eventually that aggravated the Pepsi Challenge people, who called the police, but the police were like our friends. And in fact, we were even friends with the mayor at that time, Al Vellucci, and the city council sponsored several marches to Draper Lab against the nuclear arms race. And so we were tight with local activists and politicians in town. So the Pepsi Challenge had to eventually just gave us the middle finger and move to another corner, which was sad for us because it was so much fun. But, that's the way things go. So anyway, we're back to this, the thing that was fascinating to me and that I started to realize as the years progressed, that there was virtually we had to go search for some homeless people in 1981, on March 26, 1981, because you didn't see camps around. There was that lady that was, bound in garbage bags that leaned against the side of Symphony Hall on Massachusetts Avenue. But otherwise, there was very few people.
Yeah. Nothing like a camp, right? I mean,
there were no
growing up
tent camps
in the New York area as a child in the 70s, like I never would see anyone living in any kind of without a house in Connecticut. But then when we'd go into New York City, I have seared in my mind as a child, memories of men in cardboard boxes on the sidewalk.
Yeah, and that was really the Bowery. And
the Bowery.
And I remember when I first was driving around Manhattan, how you had to avoid the Bowery because they would take those like greasy rags and smear your windshield, so you had to go somewhere and wash your windshield afterwards, just trying to get a few dollars. That's. But yes, it was like America was housed at that time, and hence the title of this program. And there was very, very, you never saw soup kitchens outside anywhere. And that remained kind of the case until about 1985, when in Boston, it started to become pretty evident that the unhoused community was getting larger and larger. And that's when the original campaigns to drive the homeless out of sight started, and I was involved in organizing to defend the rights of my friends, including Mr. Butch and others in Kenmore Square. And
but you were saying though, I mean, you're talking about driving the homeless inside, but there were no soup kitchens in church basements that were available for people at that time in 1981 who were coming to the Food Not Bombs.
Correct. We were the first actual regular meal program in Boston at that time. It wasn't long after that, or around that same time, that's when the what I guess we call Second Harvest Food Bank started in that area. And there was another such thing in a couple other places, including here in Santa Cruz County and also in Tucson, Arizona. But there was not a lot, that was really, groceries for people that lived in public housing, who WIC was not enough for them. The food program that was available from I think that was a Johnson era program. And so it just was not like what we're imagining now. And it was maybe 20 years after that, 20 years ago, when I started realizing I'd give lectures at colleges, and when you grow up with are virtually no unhoused people outside, and then now there's millions of people living outside. Younger people have the impression that there's always been unhoused people. And that's, I think, one of the most important points that Food Not Bombs can make today, is the fact that there was a time when there was not tent cities all over the United States, when people did have kitchens, when the food was, if you were needing food support, you could actually get groceries and cook them. And now we see these massive lines of people doing so because of the pandemic. And we're likely to see many of those people ending up in soup lines because they will be losing their housing. But it does point to the fact that it's a possibility that we could house everybody in the United States, and we could return to that time. And it's not that there was a much larger population of people today, or that or any of or that people just wanted to shoot heroin and meth and move to the streets, or some kind of myth like that.
And
It's
it's
an
not like there
economic
aren't other countries
policy.
where they house, pretty much everybody. I mean, there are many countries, including countries that I spend a lot of time in as a musician touring, where you don't find homeless encampments because, being homeless means you're staying in a shelter, oftentimes with your own room. I mean, that's what it means. If you're homeless in Denmark, it means, you're probably staying in a shelter where you have your own room and you're eating 3 meals a day. But
Correct. Yeah, that's been up until recently. That was common throughout all of Europe. Unfortunately, I
yeah,
was
changing.
participating in the protests against the euro back in when Bonn was the capital of West Germany, and before the European Union, and it was it was almost. I remember I was in Bochum talking to the coalition of the homeless there,
Mm.
and they said they had.
Or the
I
big
think
military bases, right? Bochum or something. Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
and they had like a bus that was down by I think the Rhine is where it's passing through there. I'm not sure which river it
I think
was,
so.
but they were they had all 25 of the unhoused people in the city of 2 million hung out in that bus. There was virtually no. I remember in Utrecht there was this one unhoused person that lived on the levee. He was a professor. He just decided he'd live on the levee. But
Hmm.
now, of course, sadly, in more recent years, you do see unhoused people, largely refugees, fleeing many of the U.S. NATO-sponsored wars. But it was used to be completely. It would be like the United States, where you did not see unhoused people. And so these are the people are living on the streets because of intentional economic and political policies that have forced people to be unable to pay for their rent and be able to afford housing. And as we know, in the United States, there's many empty housing units for every unhoused person in the country. And in
And of course,
Santa,
everything you're saying was true before the pandemic, and now so many of these things are much more true now.
oh yeah, it's just incredible.
Can,
So
can,
yeah,
can we talk a little about? I know for anybody tuning into a program about the 40th anniversary of Food Not Bombs, at least in my mind, they must be wondering the same thing I'm wondering, which is when, in the course of the past 40 years, did it become clear that you had stumbled upon a meme that was really taking off globally?
well, I after my conflict with the local authorities in Boston, I had to go underground, which I did for approximately a year. And then I resurfaced in San Francisco because um, I thought I'd been in and out of San Francisco my whole life, and I thought, well,
From the
that's a
from the frying pan into the fire. Can you talk about why you why you went underground? What was the specific circumstances, or as specific as you want to get into, in terms of why you felt like you had to go underground? That's a extreme reaction to being hounded by the authorities.
yeah. Well, they became I was going to be interviewed by the Boston Phoenix and the and WGBH about our campaign, but a lot of my many of my clients were actually I was a graphic designer at a company. I did a lot of all free graphic design for the activist community, but I had the Boston Red Sox, for example, was one of my clients. And there is a very strong nexus between the mafia and many of my clients. And so they were, I was interfering with their ability to gentrify the area. So these two news outlets asked me about why people were contacting them, threatening to kill me. And I got messages that they definitely were going to try to kill me. So
Wow.
I had to flee
From
as a result.
news outlets were telling you
Yeah,
that
they
the
were receiving these
mafia.
messages and they wanted my comment on what I thought about the people threatening. And one of the people was one of the main financial campaign supporters of the governor of Massachusetts, who was at the time running for president of the United States, Michael Dukakis, who was a person I met with this mafia don several times in a course of just 1 month. So I had personal direct understanding of that. But when you grow up, I spent a lot of my youth, or at least I graduated from high school near Boston, and I worked in Boston and often had interaction with the mob. That was completely normal. If I worked at a roast beef place, even though I was vegan, and it was run by the mob, and I had to give a white envelope to the cops every Saturday night, and so on. So this was like not totally unusual, but I also had, there was people like Whitey Bullinger and these people who become famous who were, I was also like, the FBI, of course, had already been like, I'd lost my virginity with them when it turned out everybody but my best friend Franco Flitto were FBI agents in an organization I was involved in. When you're like 18 and you discover that, it's like, wow, that's pretty impressive.
Wow, that's quite something. But get into that a little bit, because was this? I mean, I always thought when I heard that Peter Cameo, who ran for governor of California on the Socialist Workers Party ticket in the 1970s, he did a FOIA request for his about his campaign, and discovered that half of his campaign staff were agents or informants. And
this can happen.
Yeah. But I wonder if that's a lot. I mean, almost everybody was an agent or an informant in this group you're in. And I wonder, how do you think that happened because of the sort of decline of the left and the people left in the groups, and some of the groups were only the agents, like after everybody else left, or what explains that? Any idea? Have you thought about that? Like, why?
So I know exactly what happened. We actually had roughly about 100 people showing up to these meetings. And what the people who turned out to be the FBI would do is they would joke while we're all sitting around in the local church basement waiting for the meeting. They would joke about getting guns for the revolution and so on. Well, these people, we were the Boston Alliance Against Registration in the Draft, so we were attracting people that were opposed to war, and so to hang out and joke about guns. So. Bombing things and stuff at the beginning. So I'm like, I'm real young, so I don't, I just think that they're like, they're much older than me. They must know what they're doing, and must not be anything wrong. But then very quickly, actually, the numbers that showed up ended up being 7-8 people. Mm-hmm. So Frank and I thought, well, why don't we just call everybody and ask them why they stopped coming? And so we called enough people to get the idea that they didn't really like the conversations about armed revolution. And so we proposed that we call everybody back up and say, we're going to discontinue this joking in the beginning of the meetings about armed revolution, and please come back, and so on. Well, at the day at the day of that vote for that, all these people showed up who we did not know. And they voted to continue to allow the joking about bombs and armed revolution. Mm-hmm. And so at the end of that meeting, I go outside to put up, this is right before our big protest. And now we have virtually no support. And I'm putting up flyers, and Frank's in the basement of the church and sees one of the people call the police and have me arrested for putting up flyers, which I still have a warrant for my arrest for. And so anyway,
that's an arrestable offense at the time, putting up flyers. It's not a misdemeanor.
They took us away in those days. Yeah, they would handcuff us and put us away. That's kind of, it was not ticketing and ordering you to go to court was not like a thing. Anyway, things got really gnarly after that, and that's the first time when I realized that every single person other than Frank and myself were connected. And then eventually we do find out from Freedom of Information Act requests that this is verified, and so that first time is always shocking. After 40 years of this, you are completely jaded, and you can generally
maybe
tell.
A little bit too jaded, because sometimes when we're talking about these things, you kind of skip over it, like, oh, this happens to everybody, but people need to know about this stuff, Keith. This is crazy stuff. I mean, by the average standard of people in this country, most people have not had these experiences and have a lot of illusions about how things actually work here. Even people who are reasonably cynical, who are familiar with a lot of things like the mafia and a lot of corruption, would be surprised to discover that the San Francisco Police Department has a cage which they hang from the ceiling, which is 3 feet square, which they put people in and keep them in for days. And, nobody has ever taken a picture of this cage as far as I know, and nobody knows exactly where it's located. And it's a matter of hearsay, I guess. But what's very clear is these cages exist around the world. We've both seen these cages, and you've been in one of these cages.
I think when things really took off for Food Not Bombs is when I resurfaced in San Francisco, and I actually was inspired to restart to do the second Food Not Bombs group there because of Brian Wilson being hit by the train. He was a veteran that I had met at some protests in Boston years before, and he was blockading weapons shipments to El Salvador in what was a campaign called Nuremberg Actions. And I was so angry about that and upset about that. My wife, Andrea, and I decided we'd go to the big Saturday protest. And back then there was CNN, which we had no access to, but ABC, NBC, and CBS. And so when we got back to our apartment, we're looking at the news of this, and there's my wife and I in the foreground, and people who it turned out I actually had known, some of them even from Boston, were digging up the tracks and removing them. And so Andrea and I looked at each other and said, well, it looks like we're no longer underground. We might as well go back to doing what we were doing. And so I decided I'd take notes on how I was starting San Francisco Food Not Bombs. We chose Mondays at Golden Gate Park because it had a lot of visibility from people from all the world would go at the end of Haight Street, walk into the park. Plus, a lot of people lived in the Haight, and there were no meals on Mondays. So we chose that day for that purpose. And it was like a ton of fun, and the Grateful Dead would be touring, maybe the Oakland Coliseum or something, and there'd just be an extra 100 people hanging out in what's called Alvord Lake at the entrance to Golden Gate Park. And it was just beautiful every Monday that was going on. And I was delivering food to the shelters in town and other food programs and so on. And then a hippie came by and said, hey, you can get a permit for this. So we wrote a letter to this guy, Peter Ash, at the Parks Department for our permit. And it turned out it was a trap. And on August 15th of 88, we had about 45 riot police appear. The pictures of the riot police are in the promotional information about this event, and arrested 9 of us, which started what became a total of 1,000 arrests in San Francisco. The last 750 were we lost a conspiracy case, a criminal conspiracy case. And so we were arrested for felony conspiracy to serve food in violation of a court order. So I ended up with 47 such cases, plus I ended up getting framed under the California 3 strikes law. I was holding a sign in front of City Hall when we had close friends connected to the Zapatistas, and so we were supporting the uprising in January 1st of 94.
And just to interrupt for a moment, just to contextualize what you're talking about, the 3 strikes law in California, under the 3 strikes law in California, and there are laws like this in other states, I believe, but the California 3 strikes law, once you commit 3 felony offenses, and this could and has included things as minor as stealing a piece of pizza from a group of teenagers on a beach, which they said was theft, which the person who took it said was given freely. And for this crime, in one case that I read about back in the 90s, that was somebody's 3rd strike. And for this, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, mandatory, right? That was the 3 strikes law was mandatory 25 years. And you were facing that. I just want to put that in.
So the first arrest, I was attacked by the mayor's film commissioner, Nick Rommel, in a phone booth. That would be Frank Jordan, famous Franks with Franks. He gave out free hot dogs in the parks, even though he had been the chief of police arresting us a couple of years before. So anyway, he framed me I was framed for that. I was wearing a chef's hat and a chef's coat, and I'd been holding a cardboard sign in front of City Hall saying "Viva Zapatista, no NAFTA" at the time. And so that was the early cell phone event where the film commissioner, who I did not know, had called a tow truck to tow my truck away from a legal parking space in front of City Hall, and I'd gone into the payphone to get details on how I would retrieve the truck so I could remove the food and equipment. So anyway, then my second strike was I was handing out a letter from Amnesty International, who had declared food not bombs and myself prisoners of conscience if convicted because of the violence and so on. We had Howard Zinn, a professor of history, who was a friend of mine and whose history class I took when I was a youngster at Boston University, had suggested we contact the Clinton administration's Civil Rights Division to see if they would send federal marshals to San Francisco to stop the violence. So because we were being beaten up and jailed and our stuff taken up virtually every day in front of City Hall. So anyway,
did they send federal marshals? I'm assuming they did not.
No, we end up getting a nice letter from the Clinton administration saying that they reviewed the wiretap memo that we provided, all the internal San Francisco Police Department memos that we had received during our federal lawsuits against the city, and video, which we now call the Food Not Bombs Greatest Hits, which we at the time called the Food Not Bombs video press release, of people being brutalized and beaten on the streets for feeding people. At the same time, I like to point out that I was running my dogs, Pluto and Bear, at Mountain Lake Park every afternoon, and Monday through Friday, I often hung out with a man by the name of Michael Yaki, who was Pelosi's chief of staff. I come to learn.
Nancy Pelosi, currently, was she back then the Speaker of the House?
I don't think she was. No, she wasn't the Speaker of the House at that time. But she was well aware, and in fact, she had me arrested at one of her town hall meetings even though I complimented her for her great work on human rights in China. This is like years ago, and pretended like I didn't know.
Yeah, be arrested.
Yeah. I suggested that she might want to look into the idea that there were human rights violations in San Francisco and that she could do something about that. And she instead had me arrested. And then later on, years later, in 2000, I end up going on a date with a woman who turns out to be one of Nancy Pelosi's dear friends, and she asked me for a second date, which was pretty surprising. And she did so to tell me that Nancy had told her she had Thanksgiving dinner with Nancy, and said that I was in fact a bona fide terrorist. We were first declared America's most hardcore terrorist group, according to National Guard personnel, in September of 1988, which coincides with the first wiretap memo that I have from my personal phone at that time. So anyway, that's these arrests, and so then I'll let me finish the three strike story. So then I'm handing out that letter, and this politician, there's a Rush Limbaugh version of a politician called Barbara Kaufman in San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and her aide did not like the fact that we had arrived at her open door and handed her this letter from Amnesty, and she slammed the door and ended up cutting I put my hand out to stop it from hitting a friend who was also leaving her office very rapidly, and my hand went through the door, cut my hand, and I got charged with assault with a deadly weapon. They claimed I was trying to propel glass into her neck. And then my third strike, similar to the pizza story that you just had, was that every day we would go to this vegetarian restaurant on Market Street, get their milk crates, set them up as our table, since the police took all our equipment every day. And they accused me of stealing 24 Berkeley Farms Dairy milk crates. We used to have we had food, we divided up the food into thirds in those days, so that we had decoy meals that would come in, and the police would arrest those people and take them away, and then another group would come in with some more decoy meals and get arrested and taken away, and then the real food would arrive, and we did this every single day.
You had so many supporters who were also willing to get arrested for serving food, and this is in the late 1980s. I just think that's worth mentioning because people don't associate that period with that kind of activism, and that's a serious level of dedication, constant civil disobedience, constantly getting arrested, constantly risking being beaten by the police, and then coming back for more. There were other people coming back for more the way you were. I mean, maybe not.
Yeah, we actually had a program called Risk Arrest One Day a Month with Food Not Bombs, and then we would prepare the meals and make sure. Yeah, it was really fun, and so all these groups would do it. The particularly unusual event was when the National Lawyers Guild came out, and they had their sign, and they were started to share the food, and the police actually were a little stunned, and
that the NLG actually showed up.
Yeah, well, yeah.
They were surprised because that wasn't so common. These days, it's very common that the NLG.
No, they were surprised that they were going to have to arrest lawyers. That's the part they didn't like. So instead, what they did was arrested the people that came to eat, and so
they did not arrest the lawyers.
And they did not arrest the lawyers,
but we had people for eating.
Yeah. Also, during this period of time, this is actually the early '90s, and we had a pirate radio.
NLG was serving the food? The NLG people didn't come to observe, they came to serve the food?
They came to serve the food and risk arrest as lawyers. Right. See, that was, so we had church groups. There was a religious witness with homeless people who came out. Probably one of the most famous of those would be Michael Lerner, who wrote Tikkunen is
Tikkun, the group, the religious, sort of left religious, sort of spiritual, whatever we want to call it. Yeah,
right. Yeah, so he came out. Father Vitali was arrested. There was many interesting people that did that. And then also at that time we had started, and there was a lot of conflict starting up in that period around homelessness, and there was a huge camp in Tompkins Square Park where Food Not Bombs in 1989 had started their Sunday meal, and they've been every Sunday since 1989 in Tompkins Square Park at 4:00, and that's quite impressive that they've never stopped that meal. But then there was also the founding of the National Union of the Homeless, and Ron Coronado and other people like that. We were all like involved in this housing takeover campaign, and we were using Thanksgiving and I think of '92 to build support for that. And in San Francisco, our plan was to take over an abandoned hotel where they'd gutted all the windows and everything, so it was not something that we could secure. But it was across the street from Glide Memorial Church, where the mayor was known to come for Thanksgiving to do his little cutting of the turkey and putting it on a homeless person's plate. And so when he arrived, we had spent the night in the building, and we hung banners out the windows. This huge media event, of course, and they were a bit, it was quite surprising. One of our banners said "Homes Not Jails." Meanwhile, we actually had access to another building, and we put a bunch of families in it, and we kept that clandestine. And that started a campaign called Homes Not Jails, of which Religious Witness with Homeless People participated. And there was also at that time this thing called the Stuart McKinney Act, and where surplus, they were closing military bases. They closed the Presidio of San Francisco, and there was Waring Housing, which was enlisted families housing that was in mint condition. You could move in right that moment. In fact, we gathered up vets who had lived in that house as when they were soldiers, and were now living on the streets. And so there was this really massive unity of social movement groups in the Bay Area to participate in all kinds of things, including, the massive protests against the war, the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War. I wasn't in the Bay Area for the second. I was being arrested in Tucson at that time. It's another conviction I have, and another warrant that I have. And so anyway, so that energy. We also had like Stephen Dunifer had started teaching us how to make FM radio transmitters, and so we had San Francisco Liberation Radio, Free Radio Berkeley.
One
We were
of
doing
the earlier, the sort of the, I mean, I guess there's been various sort of movements of pirate radio, but that was like the ground floor of this new wave of, I guess, really driven by the advent of relatively inexpensive low power transmitters combined with the completely impossibly expensive nature of trying to actually get a license to broadcast legally. Was that
correct? Yeah, we kind of were skirting the FCC regulations by keeping under 100 watts or what, we had some kind of strategy of that, and that was and it was beautiful. God, it was so much fun doing it. That was incredible.
Was that the station that was at some point it was run by a bicycle pump or something? I can't. Did the FCC come and steal the transmitter on a regular basis like they did in Santa Cruz?
We had all kinds of fun with that. Yeah, we were for a while we were in an RV and drove around. In fact, the night,
like the El Salvador, like FMLN's mobile radio station.
Correct. Yeah. So in fact, on New Year's, the night of the January 1st, 1994, we read the English translation of the communiques from the Zapatistas from the top of Twin Peaks in that RV. And the cops came, but we just pulled the antenna down and were silent until the cops left, and then broadcast again. That was a great place to broadcast from because you get the whole east side of San Francisco. But eventually we just put it in an apartment, and we just did it in this apartment, because we kept getting caught by the FCC anyway for driving around in this vehicle. So,
and then in the apartment, was that any better, or in terms of the FCC?
Oddly enough, we never were bothered ultimately there. Partially because there was that litigation with Stephen Dunifer and Free Radio Berkeley, so there was sort of not clear what was going to happen with that, and so I think that helped us quite a bit. Every year, I would interview Jello Biafra on President's Day as our big fundraiser, which we didn't really need money or care, but I just thought that since the dead Kennedys made a good kind of combination that we want your dead president, send him to us. And I talked to him about free speech and stuff like that. And now Judy Berry was frequently on my program, and I'd be frequently on her program. She was an Earth First activist who was sadly bombed by the probably in coordination, definitely in coordination with the FBI, by possible loggers that were being ginned up by the infiltration of the FBI up in Humboldt and Mendocino counties, and so
cover up, clearly the FBI cover up.
Yeah, there's a great movie that Daryl produced called "Who Bombed Judy Berry," which it is a classic on on what we are facing even today with domestic spying and so on. And as people are probably aware, they're about to introduce a much harsher domestic terrorism law, of which animal rights activists, anarchists, Antifa, environmentalists are all part of the targeted, officially a part of the targeted communities.
Officially, although ostensibly what they're doing is passing this in response to the Capitol siege on January 6th. But as any of us, could have said as soon as they started talking about passing anti-domestic terrorist legislation, as has happened so many times for many generations in the past, they pass this legislation supposedly to target the right, and they end up targeting the left, targeting Muslims, targeting environmentalists, etc.
Yeah, if you've been around for any length of time, like for instance, once they started, for example, censoring crazy people like Alex Jones and stuff like that, you knew that was just the
tip of the
that was the excuse. That was to get Americans saying, "Oh yeah, that guy's crazy." They deplatform Trump, and people going, "Oh, thank God, he was just a horrible tweeter. He's like a nightmare." And there was some kind of logic to that, since he was connected to this who knows what went on. I call it the Capitol erection, because it's completely unclear what the actual reality of that is, where it emanated from, what the purpose of it. I've been to protests in DC seemed very many for years, and it just seemed completely out of character that you wouldn't have. I was reading on social media in links that I found on like the Washington Post and New York Times about Proud Boys and others going to try to kill politicians. Well, if I can tell that in the morning in Santa Cruz, then the FBI knew that. They're monitoring my website. They're monitoring everything I do. So
I have
just on
literally
me, they could have known that I was reading that document.
I've literally been to protests where they had 5,000 cops for 200 anarchists, and I'm not exaggerating. Yeah, in New York City.
And there's no way you could like storm the Capitol building unless somebody made that possible. And maybe it was just a bunch of inside Trump crazy people, but it seemed to me that it was actually designed specifically to encourage the passing of this new domestic terrorism law. And now we're seeing like this huge campaign of violence against homeless people. There's the normal sweeps of homeless camps, but they seem to be getting militarized and massive and constant and daily. I was called into a small camp yesterday by some people here in Santa Cruz who were told they had an hour to pack up all their belongings. Well, they'd been living there for months, and it was in this completely out of the way place where, it would not infringing on anybody. It was really well kept, and it was families, and the idea that the police were going to come in and take all their belongings and throw them away. And then we saw what was going on in Echo Park in the last couple of days in Los Angeles, or how up in Bellingham, they used a Bearcat as part of, and riot police to clear that camp. So there's like the combination of this kind of domestic terrorism thing, deplatforming of left activists and shutting down their social media accounts and those kind of things. It's all like part and parcel to what appears to be a global redlining that's even worse than the global redlining that happened under the 2007-2008 housing foreclosure crisis. As an example, here in Santa Cruz, we have maybe 8 now luxury condo projects happening. There's 2 that have been completed in the last 5 years, which are essentially empty. So
they're
we
just
don't
real
really
estate
need
investments, basically. I mean, real estate is just something you invest in, like you invest in the stock market, and the idea that this is something people need to live in is just nowhere on the equation now. And then the rents are doubling, tripling, and all this money the Congress is coming up with, which surely, I mean, this combination of concession and repression, right? They, a combination of a phrase I first learned from Howard Zinn, and they're giving away a lot of money to a lot of people, and then they're doing all this clearing the camps and all this kind of violent attacks of protests, and it's that combination that's the sort of key element here, isn't it?
Yeah. I think if you read the book Home Wreckers, it kind of gives you Aaron's well-researched book shows the strategy that is now on steroids. It's just going out of control, and there'll be as is often said, there's many. There's supposedly about 3 or 4 empty units in the Bay Area for every unhoused person, if you take the official numbers of unhoused people and so on. But in fact, the building where we were evicted from a parking lot a month ago in Santa Cruz, when a developer showed up one day and said, we're about to build this building tomorrow morning. You have to get rid of your equipment immediately. And it turned out that the building hadn't even started. And one out of town developer had already sold the project to another out of town developer, and there hadn't even been anything, built at all. And I'm sure by the time this building gets, this 7-story, 200-unit luxury condominium is completed, it will have been sold maybe 2 or 3 more times, and not a soul will ever live in it. Maybe a small handful of people will live in it, like is the case in the others. And why we need 6 more buildings like that in Santa Cruz is outrageous. And the National Association of a realtor spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it was a total of $750,000 to get rid of two of the progressive city councilors, put in their own people into power, and now rubber stamp basically every anti-homeless program, every development is rubber stamped. And the local people, Zoom has been great for the government because they can do whatever they want. They rule by decree. The city manager.
We can't go protest outside the court, shut down the court. That's not even an option if they're holding it on Zoom. How do you shut down a Zoom meeting? It's really,
Yeah, we've done our best. Actually, we have interrupted some Zoom meetings by the city council by having noise protests outside, where the person running the actual Zoom program was couldn't hear and had to temporarily shut it down, but they've figured a work around that. So there's no more, not even a semblance of democracy anymore, sadly, in many communities, including Santa Cruz. But this is where I think one of the most important messages that Food Not Bombs has. So now we're in 1,000 cities of the world.
Yeah, and if you go to foodnotbombs.net, that's the first thing you see is a wonderful map with little, placers all over the world. I think on every populated continent. I don't think you're in Antarctica, but
there was an attempt to start a Food Not Bombs in Antarctica, and I met he spent half the year in Antarctica, half the year in Silver City, New Mexico, and he tried to do a Food Not Bombs protest there, but Raytheon controls Antarctica. They're the actual sole people responsible.
Subcontractor.
They determine who comes and goes from the continent, apparently, according to him. And even though he was a scientist doing climate research, he was told by Raytheon that he would never be allowed on Antarctica again. So he didn't do it. This was, I think, a protest against the 45-day war against Iraq by Bush Sr. And but what we have found is that we are basically, I think we're at a point where protesting the government, while it's certainly something that should always happen, the more important thing is this idea of mutual aid. But the most important aspect of mutual aid is to exert our independence from the state and from corporate power. And the fact that we are going to get millions of additional unhoused people joining our ranks is, in one sense, hopeful, because it will be very hard for the authorities to hide that level of crisis. We already have run out of
crisis, right? I mean, what do you think? I mean, but at the same time, this 1.9 trillion is a lot of money, and a lot of it is going to, I mean, specifically to families like mine with the child credit and all this stuff. I mean, not that, if you're living in the streets and you don't have a bank account, that's a whole other question. But there is a lot of money going out to, basically, sort of working class people who have bank accounts and do their taxes online and all these other things, which of course it excludes a lot of people. But I mean, but at the same time, we're facing this eviction moratorium ending nationally, and who knows what the picture is. What's your prediction? What's it going to play out like?
Well, my feeling about this this most recent bailout is that they tweaked it to exactly the amount they thought would be beneficial to reduce the amount of rioting this summer. Yeah. And I think to kind of divide and conquer the poorest of Americans, so that there be some people who at least limp along. But obviously, that's not nearly enough. If you are 12 months behind in your rent, which a lot of people are, this is not going to solve that problem. It's already the eviction. We had 6 different people tell me they had been evicted in March that ate at Food Not Bombs, and I've been that you might get 1 or 2 people that tell you that in the last year or so, but now it's like escalating, and you can see that all the doorways now have people living in them in downtown. and the park where we've been doing litigation against the city. We actually had a blockade of what we were calling the holiday evictions, where the city announced on the 17th of December they were going to clear a homeless camp, where actually the police have been telling people, we'll take your stuff and arrest you unless you move to this park. And then people did, and they were there for months. And then they decide they're just going to drive everyone off into the woods and into doorways and so on. And the first about 50 people actually had that happen to them. But we then confiscated the fencing that the police put up to, somehow control that spot of land, and used it to block the police invasion on the 28th of December. And then we were able to file an injunction in federal court right after that, and that's still holding. Although we have a hearing on the 30th this month to see whether the injunction will continue or what exactly will happen. The language by the city attorney and in their arguments and in their briefs shows this kind of hatred of unhoused people, as though they're kind of rodents or something. And that, I think, is very disturbing. So back to when I had to go underground, one of the things that that concerned me was the language of the Kenmore Association, who I was actually asked to come in and take a photo of this black guy. That's the way they referred to him, and have a red circle with a red line through it saying "Wanted out of Kenmore Square." And then I pointed out to Paul, the vice president of the association, that he was actually considered the mayor of Kenmore Square. He was loved by the public, and such a poster like that would actually ruin business in our community. And I refused to do it. And that started the cascading series of events that ultimately led to my having to go underground. But Mr. Butch was when he passed away, there were candlelight vigils in every commons and throughout New England, because anybody that went to a Red Sox game gave him a quarter, listened to him sing. He looked like Jimi Hendrix, exactly. He was like, always had a broken electric guitar strapped over him, always stood in front of Captain Nemo's Pizza. I don't think, I don't know anything about what happened to the vice president of the association, but I do know that Mr. Butch was loved. And so, that we can, now exerting our independence from these institutions and creating our own systems, I think is actually the most powerful thing that we can do. And because there are millions of people potentially joining the ranks of the unhoused, squatters movements, I think, need to really pick up. I think what you're doing with the eviction defense, that's super important.
If they can't evict people, then they can't evict people. I mean, regardless, they'll have to find other ways to make money off of being landlords if that avenue isn't available. And actually, there are ways to potentially evict people, even if without forced eviction, or ways to make people's lives difficult if you're a landlord of somebody who actually can afford to pay rent and isn't paying rent. I mean, that's the thing. Like the landlords talk about, so many of the big landlords complain that, if they don't have to, if they can avoid being evicted, then what's to make them pay the rent? Well, I mean, actually, the fact that they have jobs where wages can be garnished, that's the sort of thing that can make people pay the rent all over the world where evictions are not legal, where forced evictions are not legal. But what they want to be able to do is just have the easy way out and just kick people out on the street as soon as they want to.
Yeah, exactly. And so it seems to be politicizing the middle class, actually, because of this agreed. They've really overstepped their bounds. And so that brings me to the other point of remembering 40 years ago today's soup kitchen is that we can get back, if we organize, to a point where everybody in the United States is housed. And we've got to create that consciousness that that's absolutely to be assumed. So this idea, we have a slogan with the I'm very active with the National Union of the Homeless, which I encourage anybody to contact the National Union of the Homeless or myself. I can connect you with to build solidarity with people that, we have a slogan that, homeless but not helpless. And another is that homes not tents, because really we're not struggling to protect just so that people can stay in their tents in tent cities. The real focus is ultimately stop tormenting and criminalizing and rounding up unhoused people and start putting people indoors where, start making housing available. And then you get kind of these, then there becomes this thing, we got to build all this housing, it'll take us years to build this housing. No, there's all this housing being built. It's just being built for rich people. It's time we start demanding and forcing, and by taking over, quite frankly, these luxury condominium projects and start moving people in. Yes. I think we're at this very intense situation that is like that. So back in the Kenmore Square, my wife, Andrea, and I had written a response, which is partly why we got so viciously attacked, which is the language that the Kenmore Square Association was using surrounding unhoused people was dehumanizing. It was very similar from our perspective in 1985 to what we imagined was the language used against unhoused people as Hitler was rising to power. And we tried to...
Got a little glitch there, some kind of delay. Why'd you freeze there? Why does that happen always to people after it's been exactly an hour? We've been online for an hour together, and then they freeze up and go away. But hopefully he comes back. Let's see. Try going away and coming back, Keith. Let's see. Click that link again, and we'll see if we can get Keith back. We don't know why he disappeared, but presumably it's the CIA, the FBI, San Francisco police, whoever's doing these things. But could be just a technical issue. But we'll see if he comes back. But we have been spending the past hour and 6 minutes talking with Keith McHenry, co-founder of Food Not Bombs, on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of Food Not Bombs' first meal served. And you're back, right?
Yep, I made it back. Yep. Cool.
Okay, good. Whatever happened, it's over, apparently.
These things happen, yeah. So, I really, it's a crazy period in world history. But if we, these podcasts like this DIY. Food Not Bombs was involved in. We had a couple of world gatherings, one in '92 and then one in '95. In the preparation for the 1995 World Gathering in San Francisco, we came up with this idea that we called indie media, and that we would broadcast the news about the gathering and so on. It kind of went with our pirate radio project that we were doing. And fortunately, some activists in Melbourne, Australia, figured out how to do. They developed software for people to share files and so on indie media. And for a long time, indie media was like this pretty large program, and it played a giant role in the success of the World Trade Organization protest in November of 90. That was 99, right? In Seattle, the Battle of Seattle.
It's huge.
And
period.
If we didn't have indie media, we would have when it would have been like, I remember if you read A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, there is he talks about the protests against the Gulf War, the first Gulf War, and the official number of people protesting, according to news outlets, was 5,000 people. I have to tell you, it was millions of people. There's actually a friend of mine got a hold of some video from a CNN helicopter showing how massive it was. In fact, we shut down the federal building merely by having so many people that you couldn't, there was no physical room to be outside you couldn't get in and out of the federal building because it was just jammed from wall to wall.
That's an interesting point, though. I just being of a similar age to you, I have to ask what you think of this, because like when I was young in the 80s and and then well into the 90s and actually well into the Bush administration, really, I mean, up until 2005. Protests could be absolutely massive, but they would get virtually no media coverage unless it was like in the city where the protest was happening, and it was so big that they had to mention it because the whole city was shut down,
Right.
But otherwise, the policy of the corporate media was really to just completely ignore us. And then with Camp Casey, and then with Occupy Wall Street and various other protests, not all of them, but some of them, it was just the opposite, where there would be like 100 people in a park, and the media would be there making it look like it was a much larger crowd. And I don't know if you've noticed this back and forth policies of the media in terms of whether they protest, whether they cover protests, and to what degree, if at all, et cetera. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I do. Like the anti-police brutality movement, I was involved with a group of people, including, well, I don't know if Van Jones actually participated in this ultimately, but he and I spent 14 hours together in jail on the protest against the Rodney King beating, right? So there
Van
was
Jones, who
yeah,
became an advisor to Obama for
yeah,
a little while
yeah.
before
It
he
was actually
resigned. Yeah,
he got fired because of
he
Glenn
got
Beck.
fired.
Actually, it was funny because I was doing a protest, but outside of the White House this summer, that Obama's first year in there, called "The Change We Need Now," and a few of us we were making solar. We call it White House solar bread. We make 2 loaves of bread in a solar oven every day, and we pretended like Obama was for universal single-payer health care, that he was for solar power, and that he was going to free Leonard Peltier, the American Indian political
I wrote a
prisoner.
song about that called "If Only It Were True."
Yes, it was so much fun. We spent the whole summer out there, from like roughly noon until it got dark, doing this. And but I was also writing "Hungry for Peace" at that time, so I would go to this place called Cozy's at the end of the block, and that's where Van and I would hang out and talk during lunch there. And he was like, "I'm on the inside, and you're on the outside," and so on. And then weekend, he said, "Well, I'm not going to last the weekend. Glenn Beck is going after me for my banner storm." And it's funny because Van and I were, when the Rodney King uprising happened. See, that's the other interesting thing that you're pointing to. There were uprisings all over America.
That's right. That's one of the many things. And of course, I was also involved, and I was in Eugene and Seattle and other cities during that period. And it was huge. It was all over the country. It was multiracial. It was not as they were always making it seem like it was only Black people. And and it was mainly in LA, and that was not the case. It was all over the place, and it was multiracial. And one thing that was very interesting was a friend of mine was in New York City at the time, and where the police lines formed was separating all the Black and brown neighborhoods, not because they were worried that there would be conflict, but because they were worried that just the opposite of conflict would happen.
Yeah, so that was to me, I was amazed. So that there was like these marches all over San Francisco that all met at the State House, State Building on Van Ness and I think McAllister, and that was the most inspiring thing, because I'd been to a lot of protests, and usually they were all white, or they were all Black, or they were all Latino. And this one, it was a third white, third Latino, third Black, and actually a lot of Asian people involved too, and as one would expect in a place like San Francisco. And it was inspiring. I call it one of the greatest days of my life, even though at the very end of it, somebody yelled my name, said, "Hey, McHenry," and I turned around and I got hit right between the eyes with a nightstick by a cop. And every morning,
with you today, that blow.
Every morning I wake up with my sinuses hurting. Sometimes I can't. I feel miserable for the entire day from that beating. That was April. I think that's April 26, 1992. And so anyway, at the beginning of that riot, while we're at the State House, Van Jones is there with his Storm banner, the one that Glenn Beck went after him for. And I was there with a 3-lane Food Not Bombs banner with my friends. And he wanted to, he was all excited. He was going to San Francisco State.
You called it a 3-lane banner? That's a banner that takes up 3 lanes of a highway?
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's my 3-lane banner. And so he was like, let's go to the Western Addition, or the Fillmore, which is the black neighborhood. And he said, let's go there. The riots should go there. That's what happened in the 60s. And I actually was in the Martin Luther King riots in Philadelphia and saw what was happening, the military, the tanks, all that. Old. So I had an idea of what to expect. So I have my banner, and I said, I don't think we should go to the Fillmore, because those are actually African-American people that own property. Why burn that down? We should be going to Pacific Heights. And I remember this woman from KQED radio going, what did you just say? And she got the mic out there, and I go, I think we should go to Pacific Heights. The cops are killing us in behalf of them. Let's go there. But my banner, and it was so big that we decided because at this moment, a huge number of riot police were marching down Van Ness, attacking the back of the protest, and young people were starting to throw rocks at them and starting to throw rocks through City Hall windows and stuff like that. And so I'm like, well, here's the riot starting, so I'm going to go. And I marched towards Market Street and the financial district. And fortunately, the riot moved with the giant banner, and that made it, so that was an interesting thing. But it was like about a year before that Van and I spent a bunch of time in jail together. Virtually every single person in a protest, Rodney King protest, was arrested. We were kettled. That was the early days of kettling. And so he claims in his official bio that a guy he was jailed with a guy, and it inspired him to spend his life organizing for human rights and against police brutality and so on. So, and so we had some nice chats at Cozy's before he got fired and so on, and we occasionally talk. Obviously, he will never have me on CNN with Van Jones or something like that, or even publicly admit. He was actually, I have great surveillance video of the San Francisco police surveilling Van Jones when he was a National Lawyers Guild legal observer at one of our protests. I think we mentioned the protest on Flashpoints last night, where I was arrested for I was wearing a Santa costume, and he was our legal observer during that arrest when I was facing 25 to life. Anyway, this police, so that what kind of leading up to is, why was the George Floyd murder, and where it actually started taking on like massive media presence. There was some after Ferguson, some around, there was some local stuff around police brutality, but there's been a very active anti-police brutality movement. We had this thing called the Stolen Lives that grew out of the Rodney.
But Trump wasn't in the White House, right?
That's exactly right.
That's the difference, and because the media, as the corporate media, it actually didn't like Trump, which is, true to what Trump suspected, and not necessarily for those same reasons that he thought they didn't like him, but they didn't like him, for all kinds of other reasons, and so they gave us. Basically, it seemed to me that as soon as Trump got elected, if an anarchist in Portland stubbed his toe, it was going to be headline news. That was a basic.
Yeah, he was the greatest thing for God. It was amazing. So I actually wrote the Anarchist Cookbook, replacing William Powell's original version that he put together to avoid being drafted into the Vietnam War. And he and I corresponded a bit before his death, and I got permission to do that. He actually didn't care, and in fact, and I put his denunciation of his original book as a forward in my book, and wrote about actual anarchism and about how to organize, and has vegan recipes and so on. So
I love it that he agreed that it was that he liked that you used that title. That's a beautiful.
yeah, it was beautiful. And so every time Trump would say anarchism, so my publisher, Chaz Buffet at C Sharp Press is like, calls me, oh my God, I can't believe how many books, Anarchist Cookbooks, it's just flying off and the weirdest thing is, like, like you could buy my Anarchist Cookbook from Walmart's website and things like that.
I love it. And I'm pretty sure when Trump mentioned Howard Zinn had the anti-Zinn little history conference last fall, I'm pretty sure Zinn's books sold through the roof for a few days at least.
Yeah, just too funny. It's kind of a very, very weird thing. But now also to see the history of anarchism in my lifetime. I've been an anarchist since about 1965, and like political, like communist parties and all of them were like kind of the predominant people on the left for years, and we were always sort of like on the margins, even though we were spending a lot of our energy organizing. But I've never been invited to speak at a national protest ever, even when I've been there, and I've know many of the people that organize these national protests. But I've only been on the stage one time, and it was at the RNC in Tampa, and it was because wasn't very many speakers, and they just put me on at the end. They said, we need somebody else to fill the next.
There was hardly anybody there.
Yeah, so that's and so I think that tells you something. But the about how people are so protective of their political party and how they're going to have a vanguard movement and so on. But then when the Berlin Wall came down and Eastern Europe started changing, which is now considered Central Europe, anarchism and Food Not Bombs just took off, and we still have a ton of chapters in fact, we were most recently arrested in Kiev in Minsk and in Belarus, and so we have so there's it kind of opened up the idea and the philosophy of anarchism, decentralized, non-hierarchical, community-based mutual aid, and then the pandemic just took it to another whole level. And so that's where I think things are very optimistic, is that a lot, even it takes a long time. I was just reading something about a Food Not Bombs activist saying, well, we're a Band-Aid, not the solution. But the reality is it really is, it takes a long time. It's taken 40 years today to get to this point. It might take another 40 years. I always joke with people, you think you're tired today, wait till 40 years from now, you'll be real tired. And so it takes persistence in it, and things are slowly flipping around and to some extent. But of course, the repression, because this is a huge threat, the fact that we're supposed to be arrested in Santa Cruz on March 1st, because we're sharing food at this parking lot, this abandoned parking lot. And we actually, during the pandemic, raised money to buy a shipping container, a 20-foot shipping container, to put our equipment and so on in, to make it a ton easier, because we've done it every single day for over a year. But for the first 100 days, we were the resources for the community, if you were outside at all. We made a huge impact with Katrina. Food Not Bombs and one Veterans for Peace bus and Felipe from the Rainbow family were the food for 8 months with Common Grounds and Scott Crow and Malik and all of them on Divine Street in New Orleans, and we had we were feeding the people outside the Astrodome in Houston. We had meals all over. I remember this one group of young guys were trying to get food by boat from Port Angeles, Texas to New Orleans, and the poor guy, the guy calls me up. He's a young man. He said, we were trying to land our boat on the levee, but the National Guard was shooting at us. We were shooting at them, and eventually we ran out of ammunition. And so we really sorry, Mr. McHenry, we couldn't get the food onto shore, but we tried. It was like an 8-hour firefight,
Oh my God.
And I'm like, wow, that's a crazy story.
Totally.
And, so we'll meet you with a truck in Port Angeles. And
was anybody shooting when you got the truck over there?
No. Then so that was also, the beauty of being outside the system. So for instance, Hartford Food Not Bombs, I remember Dan calls me. So I was at Camp Casey when on a Veterans for Peace bus when we made the foodnotbombs.net, Katrina.html
I was
website.
at Camp Casey at the end of August 2005, before everybody left, like just before the hurricane hit, I guess, right? Or what's
I was there. I had that big blue bus, which I named Katrina ultimately, that I lived in for years, and we had and oh man, the FBI situation at Camp Casey was unbelievable.
Really?
It was so much fun though, like outmaneuvering them. It was a blast. I had the best time doing that. But they were trying to get us to move the kitchen to be completely out of the sight of Bush's ranch and everything, and I would not cooperate, and it really angered the feds, but it worked. But anyway, that's it turned out the lawyers for Cindy Sheehan were from New Orleans, and they're the ones that tipped me off to the hurricane. And then I made the website on that Veterans for Peace bus. They had an satellite internet hookup, which now seems quaint. And people from all over the country contacted us, and I had like a spiral notebook with all the phone numbers and names of all the people from each section of the United States, and I'd hook them up with the people they were passing by to pick up more resources and so on. And then so Dan and the Hartford Food Not Bombs was one of the first groups down there, and he goes, "Oh wow, we just got to this military checkpoint and they need a letter of permission." And I said, "Well, Dan, no problem." So I made some letterhead. I wrote a letter of permission, signed it, and they emailed him a PDF, and he put it in the window of his bus, and all of our buses and trucks and cars and everything just went right through the military checkpoint with our official Food Not Bombs letter of permission. So that
as long as you're good at graphics and the letter looks good, that's important, right? It has to have a certain professional presentation, and then it's like believable, huh?
Yeah. Well, that's the trick to squatting too. Don't squat in the middle of the night. Squat in the middle of the day. Right. So if you come with a traffic vest and a hard hat and open the building up, no one will think twice. Who would open a building in the middle of the day?
Traffic vests and hard hats cannot be overrated. It can't be overstated how useful these things are. As soon as you put on a vest, everybody figures you're doing official business. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we would do with in Homes Not Jails is we would find out all the buildings that were empty because they were investment properties. We'd take the old locks off, we put the new iron locks on, and then when you came to eat at Food Not Bombs, we would canvass people who we thought were the most vulnerable and most needed to get off the streets and say, "Hey, we'll give you a free place to live." And then, of course, we say, "Meet us tomorrow at 9:00 at this address, and we'll give you the keys and the lease, and we'll show you how to turn on the water." And or actually, by that time, we usually would have the water on, and sometimes we would actually turn the power on, but that's actually a little tricky sometimes. So we would, with a lease and everything, they could go to PG&E and get the electricity turned on, and so some people lasted like quite some time in some of these properties. We had keys to, according to the book No Trespassing, we had keys to 400 buildings in San Francisco during the savings and loan crisis, which was the one before the 2007 housing foreclosure crisis, which was the one that's before the current, even more dire housing crisis. So, we've learned a lot over this 40 years of how to navigate a corrupt political and economic system.
Speaking of corrupt political dynasties and political systems, it was one of the Bush family who was very deeply involved with the savings and loan crisis. And Neil Bush, I believe, he even went to prison.
Yeah, with Silverado and all that stuff. Yeah, that
Right.
was that was kind of it's sort of quaint by today's
Yeah.
standards, because I think he only robbed $3 billion.
Right.
And that's now people rob $3 billion in an afternoon, no problem. So so anyway, there was a lot of lessons in that, and in the fact that we can create and mold our own future how we best think, but we have to do it in context of there being an actual U.S. government, an actual military, an actual police force, actual surveillance that's state and everything. But there's a spirit of those of us that are willing to build the nonviolent, peaceful, healthy world that it seems to just kind of um, that's the antidote to this kind of fear-driven horror show that's been presented by the transnational capital that we're facing right now. So
Luckily, as long as there's terrible inequality, there will be people wanting to resist that and make the world a better place. It seems to be the nature of the history of humanity.
yeah,
When there's a big division between the haves and the have-nots are not happy about it, and some of the haves aren't either, even.
yeah, I think we are at a point now. The thing is that will the summer riots that are almost guaranteed to happen just be damaging and an excuse for a total military clampdown on society, or will it be will they co-opt it like they tried to do with Black Lives Matter and make it into like T-shirts and slogans, or can we maintain our independence? And I think that's one of the other legacies of Food Not Bombs, is that we have, our very first flyer, which you can find, I think I even have that in Hungry for Peace, is it says Food Not Bombs, we never sell out. And we have not sold out, and we're not going to be selling out. And that is it. So it's these fundamental things. So when Food Not Bombs had its first World Gathering, which was also in 2 days before a major indigenous persons protest against the 500th anniversary of Columbus invading the New World, and San Francisco was chosen as the official city to, Pelosi was able to organize that, to have that be the official city to celebrate the 500th, the quincentennial. And so Native people, I happened to read a little tiny article about indigenous people in Alaska deciding they would protest that. And so that's what we called for this World Gathering at the time. And we came up with 3 principles: that the food would always be vegan or vegetarian and free to anyone, rich or poor, drunk or sober. That we would not have any headquarters, presidents, directors, but each chapter would be autonomous and make decisions involving the people that actually depended on our resources in the helping direct the local autonomous organizations. And the third is that we would not be a charity, that we'd be dedicated to nonviolent direct action to change society, so no one would have to live in the streets or eat at a soup kitchen. And so we published that in 1992, and that was then rediscussed at the World Gathering of many more people in San Francisco during the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, where we held a 10-day gathering that was magical. And you can actually see a really interesting video on that. James Ficklin had made, if you just do Google and YouTube, 1995 Food Not Bombs International Gathering, something like that. And it involved squatting, pirate radio, indie media, workshops on non-hierarchical, decentralized organizing, those kind of things. There was I think about 130 arrests for sharing free food during that time.
Wow! During that conference, this was also, I guess, a year after the Zapatista uprising, which, as I recall at the time, was an electrifying moment for a lot of horizontally oriented organizers around the world as well, too.
Yep, and that period was just expanding, and now this is our time. So if you're, for people that are not old like you and I, this is the time, and
And for us old people too. Hey, we're still walking. Still got 2 legs and 2 arms. I'm doing real well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And but yeah, it would be wonderful to be 18 again right now too, because that would be an exciting way to start your life. Although it might be frightening to be 18 right now. We have to call some 18-year-olds and ask them what their opinion of that is. But so anyway, so that yeah, just a very inspiring period, and I think that it's there could be a lot of more censorship. I've actually been thinking, we remember Paul Revere, who got in his little rowboat, went across the Charles River, and then got a horse and went out to Lexington and Concord, saying that the term is the British are coming, but everybody was British, oddly enough, at that time. And maybe the slogan was the Redcoats are coming. But so we may be needing to have alternative systems of communication as social media gets shut down, particularly if we see that now where our friend Food Not Bombs kids in Myanmar were that we couldn't communicate with them for a couple of days because the military coup had shut down all communications with them. But they are just amazingly they're on the front lines resisting every day, coming up with all kinds of very fascinating things, and it's just impressive to watch on social media what the Food Not Bombs chapters are doing in a military clampdown like that.
And look up the band Rebel Riot in Myanmar.
Yeah, Rebel Riot. Yeah, so I hope that that they join us this afternoon on Zoom. We've been having global Zoom meetings on occasion.
Oh yeah, and you're having a meeting, another sort of a more Q&A oriented meeting at 6:00 on Zoom, and then people can find out how to sign up by going to the Food Not Bombs global Facebook page, right? Facebook.
Correct. Yes, and that will be 6:00 Pacific Standard Time.
Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time, is sometime in the middle of the night in Europe or Africa.
Yeah, trying to organize
morning in Australia or China. If you're in Australia, China, Japan, it'll be nice time morning for you. Yeah,
it'll actually be Saturday for everybody over there.
Right, Saturday morning there, and
So this is the way it works, and it's been fascinating trying to have global communications, and the pandemic actually has opened that up for us in some.
Yeah, that's been a very positive aspect of the pandemic for a lot of people, including me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in fact it's sad. It's horrible that people are dying, and that there's all kinds of and that the economy is being given to the super rich even more than traditionally is the case. But there is this amazing grassroots effort happening globally, and there's this great solidarity, and that the whole decentralized nature of the internet was perfect for Food Not Bombs. So by the time that I was building the first Food Not Bombs website, which turned out to be the first year of the web, which I did not know until I read an article 20 years later on the date of the original GIF that was posted. And I still have my original GIF posted on Food Not Bombs. So I just don't want to give it up. Yeah. And which is a transparent GIF of a scan of a Food Not Bombs button. But we were already a global decentralized thing by this time, and what was it totally ended up being to our advantage that there was such a system. Oddly enough, that's DARPA, or the military, handed us these tools on a silver platter, so to speak.
So if after the nuclear war, the military and Food Not Bombs will both survive on the same decentralized internet, is the idea.
Exactly. So it's pretty funny that so it's the jujitsu or the whatever of anarchism that that's the thing. There's a real world there, and anarchists are in that real world, and they are doing things related to the reality that is occurring. But to keep that independence, we've made it clear to the city of Santa Cruz and the county of Santa Cruz that they are the city, they are the county. We are Food Not Bombs. We do what we do, they do what they do. But they don't come and tell us what's going to happen. If they want to ask us, so for instance, they tried to give us permits We refused. We gave them a memorandum of understanding showing how we would be safe during the pandemic and how our both social distancing and so on, as well as food safety. And we said, this is what we're committed to. This is what we're going to do. And we're not going to be doing what you want us to do. And so that power dynamic is essential. And I think that the more people out there perceive their movements and their groups of people and their organizations, associations as being truly independent as much as possible. We cooperate with grocery stores. We cooperate with farmers markets. Our food is recovered largely from grocery stores and farmers markets and so on, bakeries. So that is kind of the intersection between us and corporate power. Sadly enough, in a certain sense, Whole Foods is one of our biggest contributors of produce. Let's hope that continues. There's been some threats to that nationally, but hopefully that we will.
They're owned by Amazon now, so that doesn't.
Yeah, once they became owned by Amazon, things got a little on the dicey side, and they subcontracted their food donation system to another corporation, and we've had to negotiate with them to make sure that all of our chapters continue to recover food. But in the end, it's the produce worker herself that is the key person to be associated with. And that's another thing about doing Food Not Bombs. It's great to dumpster dive. It's fun. I remember I was like in a dumpster with a bunch of punks in Edmonton, Canada, and came across a 250-pound wheel of cheese and go, to heck with being vegan, let's be freegan. And somebody in Gainesville, Florida ended up, shared that story, and he made like a beautiful flyer about being freegan. And then before long, there's all these people that are into being freegan. And that
is that where the term came from, as far as you know?
Yeah, that's the best I know. That's a joke I made, and I would share. I was on a tour. I was on the Rent is Theft tour with doing a cooking demonstration, of which I broadcast on a pirate radio, and to everybody in the room, and also if you were outside, and then we would take over an abandoned building at the end of each presentation, and I would share that little story, and I drove around with my dog Pluto all over North America, sharing that story and doing that.
You had a dog named Pluto. Good.
Yeah, my dog's Pluto. I love Pluto. He went everywhere I went for 15 years. That was great. So anyway, probably we should wrap this up. This is almost, I can't imagine anyway.
Probably. We got viewers this whole time. There's a good bunch of dedicated viewers, but people who want more of Keith McHenry can tune in at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. Find out, go to facebook.com/Food Not Bombs Global to find out the details about tonight's Zoom session with Keith, and here on the 40th anniversary of Food Not Bombs, first meal served. This has been absolutely wonderful, fascinating, entertaining conversation. People can find it archived in various places, including the Food Not Bombs Global Facebook page and the videos section, as well as at Popular Resistance and Kebu's Facebook pages and my Facebook page, and on my YouTube channel, and in podcast form if you look for This Week with David Rovix, wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, it's been great.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it this evening.
So fun. Yeah.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Yeah. I look forward to people calling in and or whatever it is that you do on Zoom.
They can on Zoom. There'll be ways for them to comment, right? On
correct. Yeah. In fact, what I'm hoping to do, because I like to do this, is just let people. Yeah, it's be like a giant global Food Not Bombs gathering, like I've done in the past. So because so that's if you're starting a Food Not Bombs chapter in your community, we have like 7 steps to starting the Food Not Bombs, which is on foodnotbombs.net. And then a lot of the new groups, I'm happy to do a Zoom meeting with you as you're getting involved and answer questions. And that's the way I've been doing touring right now under the pandemic. I hope I'm working on another book. Right now, I forgot to mention this on Dennis's show yesterday, but your Lake Eola, the Ballad of Lake Eola, which is a song about the arrests in Orlando, mentions food terrorists. That's one of the lines. And food terrorist was the There's a woman, amazing filmmaker, Liz Tadich in Australia, who has followed Food Not Bombs around for years and years. I think we spent maybe 12, 15 years together traveling the world. And in Orlando, her working title was food terrorist, and the mayor of Orlando, Buddy Dyers, then declared that we were food terrorists. We were already officially terrorists, according to the State Department and the Pentagon. But he used that term, which is probably where you appropriated the term for your lyrics of your song.
Article, yeah.
And now I am that's my working title right now for my memoir I'm working on, which I hope comes out relatively well. I hope to finish the 5th revision of it in the next few months.
Revision. This is going to be good. Do you have a publisher, or are you going to put it out yourself?
Well, I mean, C-Sharp Press will definitely publish it. So that I'm not concerned about that. And potentially will be maybe even more other publishers might be. Maybe they'll have a bidding war with Chaz.
Hey. Yeah.
but anyway, I'd like to be, PM might do, AK, who knows? But definitely Chaz has already got first dibs, and so the my working title for that is the Food Terrorist Diaries. I don't know if that's it.
Excellent. I like it.
I hope that
I like it.
That's my current name for that book. I have a list of zillion names, but that's the one I've currently settled on.
I like it because terrorists are supposed to write diaries anyway, so it's very consistent with what we think of, with the what was that Diaries, but the Turner Diaries, yeah.
Yeah. The sad thing for Mr. Buddy Dyer, we still share food there every week. It's the Orlando Food No Bombs. It's just incredible. In fact, we ended up in a much better location as a direct result of that conflict, which is in front of City Hall twice a week, I believe, still twice a week. And poor Buddy Dyer then had a real terrorist incident, which was the Pulse massacre. And so, boy, I can't imagine how he felt, where he's declaring people sharing food at Lake Eola Park as food terrorists, and then having an actual horrible terrorist event happen.
Yeah, maybe he had to stop. He had to retire the use of the term terrorist in light of the Pulse massacre, I hope.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how Buddy's doing anymore, what's going on there, but our Food Not Bombs chapter serves food outside of his offices every week, and are just it's a much larger number of people doing Orlando Food Not Bombs now than at the time of the original arrest. So
that worked. Yeah.
Yep.
Or that backfired, depending. Yeah.
Exactly. And then while I was in custody, Commander X was blocking all the Disney websites and stuff like that, and I got to be interviewed by the media while in jail. That's never happened before, and they wanted to know how I was manipulating events from inside jail and blocking all the tourist websites.
You took lessons from what's his name, that guy, Chapo. Yeah.
So it's this whole crazy thing, and they were, and didn't I feel bad about all these corporations losing millions of dollars? And I had no idea this was all happening because I was in custody. I couldn't even call out because of the way the jail systems are now, and so I asked them, each of the news reporters, I go, well, did somebody fall off a ladder and get injured as a result of this? Or what happened? And they said, well, no one can book their things. I go, well, I thought Disney probably still had telephones. I don't know what you're talking about. But anyway, that gained us another bunch of Food Not Bombs chapters started as a direct result of that conflict, or the one in Fort Lauderdale, or the 4 different waves of arrests in Tampa, or the arrests of Food Not Bombs in Moscow, or the arrest of Food Not Bombs in in Minsk. It just
backfires most of the time, huh?
Yeah. It just helps build this movement. It's a drag for those people that do get injured, or they can be uncomfortable to be in jail for a bit. I certainly hated being in Orange County jail. That was the worst. I've been arrested in Nigeria. I've been kidnapped in Nigeria. I've been jailed in many jails in the United States, but that was the worst experience I've ever had. It's like something about it being so modern and bizarre. And
worse than a stress position cage in a black site in San Francisco, or is that just not in the same category?
Yeah, that's way beyond being arrested. That's like
that's a whole other thing.
The level of trauma from that took me a long time. A lot of EMDR stuff like that. That's very important if you are, and this hanging out with other people that have been in the stress position cages. So I first became talked about that publicly because my lawyers had suggested, if you imagine 1984, you said you were like had your ligaments and tendons ripped and your clothes torn off you and placed in a small cage hanging from the ceiling for 3 days in the dark, they would have thought you were mentally ill or something. And so my lawyer said, just keep that under wraps. Don't let people know actually what happened. It will discredit your movement. But then when Abu Ghraib happened, I happened to be living in Istanbul at the time, and Abu Ghraib was huge. And in the Muslim world, it was a huge deal. The 52 photos that Americans saw were only a small number of the total photos that were available. There's huge photos at Taskin Square as you got off the bus there. People signing letters, the UN denouncing the United States. You could watch details of it on all the different TV channels and so on. And so we're all talking about it at my birthday party. We were like having dinner on the Bosphorus. Beautiful scene, unbelievable. And Ordakoi, it's just like heaven. Now I'm sure it's repression's horrible, but Funabans is still flourishing throughout Turkey, the best I can tell. And anyway, it turned out that half of the people at my birthday party had been tortured and in the stress position cage
and held in those cages.
Yep. Yeah. And half of them for being Kurdish or speaking Kurdish, and half of them for being leftists. And so that's when I came out, so to speak, as a survivor of torture.
I wonder I guess I know the answer, but I just have to ask. I wonder, what do you think are the prospects for the new district attorney of San Francisco, whose father is currently serving a life sentence in prison, for possibly looking into the fact that the San Francisco police torture activists?
It'd be interesting. I should talk to him and see what's going on. Yeah,
I think it would be good.
I have a lot of Kamala Harris was defeated the district attorney Terrence Hallinan, who was a huge ally of Food Not Bombs. He was not the district attorney when I was facing 3 strikes. He was a city supervisor or county supervisor, and he actually came out and risked arrest serving food in solidarity with us during this period.
But he was defeated by Kamala Harris.
Yeah, through this huge corrupt, through police unions and so on, and
who supported Kamala Harris, I assume.
Yeah, correct. They were not wanting a progressive to be the district attorney of San Francisco at any cost, and so that
now it's happened.
Yeah, it finally did happen. I don't know, for whatever reason, people weren't looking and didn't know to fund his opponent, and so yeah, we can go on and on about that.
We could. let's do part 2 soon. Well, now we're starting to lose viewers. we definitely got to stop before we get to 2 hours. But let's do part 2 again sometime soon.
We certainly will do it again. And everyone contact us at foodnotbombs.net and get involved. It's a lot of fun. It sounds gross to be tortured, but I'm the only one in Food Not Bombs that got the stress position cage. So it's
there's on the plus side, you're unlikely. There's only a 1 in of all the people involved with Food Not Bombs across the country, only 1 has been held for days in a small cage in a dark room.
We don't want to scare you off. It's very unlikely this will occur to you.
Likely you won't. Yeah, that's what, other people I've talked to who have been shot at by they often just don't want to mention it. We got shot at that one. It was just that one day in the 60s, and the bullet didn't hit anybody. So but it's still kind of scary, right? Yeah.
But obviously,
I remember when attorney William Kunstler, actually the first time I heard him give a speech, somebody in the audience said, "Can you talk about when they just shot in your living room?" And he, I don't really want to talk about that. It might deter people from becoming lawyers. Like, oh, okay, good.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. The repression encourages a lot of people to join. I mean, some reason all the arrests have there's usually another 10, 15, 20 Food Not Bombs chapters start up in defiance of
That's amazing.
whatever.
That's such a good sign about humanity.
Yeah, it is. It's really beautiful. It's just people do not want to put up with fascism, and so that I think is very positive. So yeah, we better sign off or we'll lose everybody.
Okay, tonight, Zoom, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, and this has been a discussion with Keith McHenry, one of the founders of Food Not Bombs, on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the first meal served, and you can find this archived in various places. And thank you so much, Keith.
Thanks.
See you all again soon.
Cool. Look forward to your next songs.
One about stress position cages coming right up.
Beautiful.
I already wrote the lyrics.
Oh, beautiful.
This morning. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Woohoo. Okay.